and worked his way up to be chair of the House Agricultural Appropriations Committee. This is the committee that decides how much money goes to all of these things. And he was chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture from 1949 to 1995. And it is one of the great ironies of Department of Agriculture policy that what you see at the bottom is a picture of the main Department of Agriculture building in Washington, D.C., proudly advertising its farmers market, which is right outside of this building, in front of the building that is named for Jamie Whitten. It's the Jamie Whitten Federal Building named after him. And that system lasted well into his tenure on the committee, except that it fell apart because of changing agriculture in the United States. And we have to look at what is referred to by the Department of Agriculture as the 20th century transformation of U.S. agriculture and farm policy. And you heard about some of this from Michael Pollan, but I want to show you some data on it. First of all, the big change was the pressure to get farms larger. So between 1950 and 2000, the number of farms in the United States went from nearly 5.5 million to about 2 million. And at the same time, the farms that remained became much, much larger, going from 200 acres to more than 500 acres, or to nearly 500 acres on average. An enormous shift over time, and if you want to know why rural America is so depleted of population and is all boarded up, this is why. Because with the decline in the number of farms came a decline in the population, and that's why the Midwest is so depleted of people. There were other changes as well. The number of crops per farm declined from an average of 5 different crops per farm in 1900 to an average of 1 crop by 2000. And that's, of course, the monocropping that Michael Pollan talked about and the lack of diversity that you heard about from Gary Sposito. At the same time, because of technological changes, and the advent of the kinds of fertilizers and other kinds of crops that we have, the productivity of agriculture increased enormously, so that in 1940, the average farmer could feed just about close to 20 people, but now it's up to 155 or 150 or more people per farm. So it's very, very efficient. And most people would think that could be a very good thing. We have a huge food supply, and it's not very expensive. It means everybody can afford it. And so to some extent, some of those ideals are being met. There's some other interesting things about the changes, and here's one of them. These are maps of counties in the United States, electoral districts in the United States that are dependent on farms for most of the income in those counties. In 1950, much of the United States was agrarian, and most counties in the United States were dependent on farm income. By 2000, there's a band in the Midwest going down the country, straight down the Midwest, and in the South. And what's really interesting about this map is that it tracks very nicely with election results and the red states. You can superimpose the red states over these maps, and they're pretty close. So that tells you a lot about the political situation. That also tells you why agribusiness spends more money on lobbying of Republicans than it does on Democrats. And this comes from Open Secrets organization, a website that is an invaluable resource for anybody who wants to know about how lobbying works in the United States. This is the place where you go to find that out. They've performed a tremendous public service in providing this information in an accessible way. Now, I've said that the Farm Bill is big and complicated, and I've said other rude things about it, and I now want to go into a few examples, if I may. I just love this picture. It was during the time when the Farm Bill was under consideration in 2013, and here are these poor legislators looking at this incredible pile of paper. You can bet that they couldn't possibly have read through all of it. So when I say that the bill is big and incomprehensible, this will give you an example of why. I've said that the bill is complicated. This comes out of the Farm Bill in 2008, but as far as I can tell, it hasn't changed. And these are federal milk marketing orders that come under the commodity title of the Farm Bill. And the only thing I want you to see here is all these colors. Each one is a different price structure. Try and understand this. If you are in the dairy business, you got to pay somebody to explain all this to you and to explain to you how you can take advantage of a system that's as complicated as this one. I also said that I thought the priorities of the Farm Bill were extremely confusing. Here's one result of that, and that has to do with the amount of corn we grow. It's bad enough to consider it from an ecological standpoint, to consider how much corn is used to feed animals. But how about how much corn is used to feed automobiles? Doesn't that seem extraordinary to you, that 40% of the corn that's grown in the United States today is used for ethanol to go into automobiles? And at enormous, enormous environmental cost. Part of that environmental cost is that this is an incentive to grow corn in places where corn should never be grown, because it requires too much water, because it requires too much input, and in which it's not good for ecology. So that's one thing. The other is what we grow. The top 10 farm subsidies by crop between 1995 and 2012, so this is the previous Farm Bill, most of the payments from either insurance or direct payments went to corn. A lot of it went to cotton, to wheat, soybeans, and then to a much lesser extent to rice, sorghum, peanuts, barley, tobacco, and sunflowers. Almost all of this to feed animals, if not cars. But certainly to feed animals, feed and fuel, not food. And this was, somebody calculated that there were $253 billion in total subsidies of these particular crops during those years. There was some 689 million for apples. That sounds like a lot, but millions are rounding errors in Farm Bill terms. If you're not talking about billions, you're just talking about spare change. And the other specialty crops, fruits and vegetables, had zero subsidies. Now that's changed a bit in the 2014 Farm Bill, but not by much. One result of all of this was tremendous overproduction of food. Farmers were being paid, once the acreage limits were removed, which happened in the 1970s, farmers were paid to grow as much food as they possibly could. Hedgerow to hedgerow was the term, and farmers are very good at following incentives. They're really good at producing food efficiently, and so the result of that was a sharp increase in calories in the food supply that occurred starting in the late 70s, 1980s. That's what the arrow points to, is late 70s, early 80s, exactly tracking with rising rates of obesity. Now, for those of you who know epidemiology, so this is an association, and association is not causation. But if people are eating more calories, and there's plenty of evidence that people started eating more calories starting at that time, that's a sufficient explanation for obesity. And I think we can say that we have a food system and agricultural policy in this country that promotes overeating and overconsumption of food. Now, we have health policy in this country, and that comes from the Department of Agriculture too. And that health policy is My Plate, which is the food guide that's put out by the Department of Agriculture, and it says, make half your plate fruits and vegetables. Does our agriculture policy promote fruits and vegetables? Absolutely not. Our agricultural policy promotes corn and other grains, cotton and oils. Fruits and vegetables amount to less than 1%, less than 0.5% of the total subsidies. Tobacco got 2%. This is when we still had subsidies. And I just want to say a word about subsidies. We did get rid of those in the 2014 Farm Bill. That was a big step forward. And the reason that it was possible to get rid of agricultural subsidies was because there was opposition to it on the right as well as on the left. So the American Enterprise Institute, which I think it's fair to say is a relatively right-wing, it's a quite right-wing organization, has written any number of documents about direct payments and farm programs, and they were strongly opposed to this kind of subsidies, saying that this distorted a market economy, while at the same time the Environmental Working Group, in another really major public resource, had maps of where the subsidies went. Subsidies went to farms for historical reasons, not necessarily because they were actually producing food, but because they used to produce food. And more subsidies went to bigger farmers, and the Environmental Working Group mapped where in the United States people were who were receiving farm subsidies, because that's public information. And all those little red dots are on Manhattan, where I live, where I can assure you there's not much agricultural production going on, particularly this time of year. We do have urban farms and rooftop gardens, but they're really quite small, particularly in lower Manhattan, where the dots are most highly concentrated. So as a result of this enormous opposition to subsidies, the 2014 Farm Bill got rid of them. This was considered a major step forward, and replaced it with crop insurance. Crop insurance, when I talked about crop insurance in my Farm Bill class at NYU, the class was astounded and said, I want to go into that business. Because this is a business in which the insurers who do the insuring of the crops are paid by the government to do that. And their insurance policies are subsidized by taxpayers. So you're paying the insurance to insure farmers, and it's a really great deal for everybody except taxpayers. The farmers get $1.90 for every dollar they put into crop insurance, and the insurance companies get $1.44. And the whole thing is guaranteed by the government. That means you. And so people who are looking at these kinds of things, like Brian White, who's an analyst of crop insurance, made this statement that crop insurance has the advantage of obfuscation. The average citizen has little notion of the wastefulness and inequity of this program, and I would say that that's true of almost everything in the Farm Bill. The other thing that makes people really concerned about the Farm Bill is that farmers are making money these days. And I'm talking about the big farmers, the agribusiness. Gross farm income has gone up steadily since 2000. Production expenses have gone up, but not nearly as much. And net farm income has increased steadily over that period. Again, we're not talking about the people who are selling at farmers markets on Shattuck. We're talking about large agribusiness in the Midwest and in these other places. And all of this together is, of course, fodder for cartoonists. And this cartoonist says, looks like they passed the Farm Bill. Too bad the farmers aren't here to see this. I am a farmer. Right. I love the cartoons on this. Here's another one. Of course, there's pork. It's a Farm Bill. Because if I can summarize this, the Farm Bill favors and provides incentives for big, intensive farms. It favors the South and Midwest over the Northeast and West. And you in California know that because California grows the specialty vegetables.